Learn about Gemara. We are up to Daf Chofei Amar Aleph, and we're talking about how do you, what evidence do we use to prove that a person is a kohen or not a kohen? So the Gemara says, says the Gemara Daf Chofei Amar Aleph. We are up to Toshma. Okay, we were discussing that whether we are Maila, if you see someone duchening, does that already give us enough evidence, credibility for this person that this person is a kohen? We talked about from Truma, whether you see someone in Truma, that's sufficient or not. Says the Gemara Toshma, come in here, what establishes someone's kahuna? See as kapayim in bubble. If you see somebody duchening, that's enough proof to say that he's a kohen. And the reason is, the way Rashi explains, and everyone agrees with Rashi explains, because in Babel they have a bezdin, a fixed bezdin, and therefore they would just check up and investigate this person to see whether the person really is a kohen or not. But eating truma or eating challah in Babel doesn't prove anything, because it's only the rabbanon, and therefore the bezdin wouldn't really bother investigating. But in Surya, eating challah. And Surya, according to Rashi, is because David HaMelech conquered on his own. It's called Kibush Yachid, and we're going to have a machlekes whether in other Gemaras whether Kibush Yachid is considered a conquest for it as part of Eretz Yisrael or not part of Eretz Yisrael. And this time to hold that Kibush Yachid is considered a valid conquest, and therefore all the dinim of Eretz Yisrael now also move into Surya. So Challah can be from the Torah, and Truma can be the Torah. So right now we assume that challah is from the Torah, so truma from the Torah. So certainly if you see a kohen eating challah, that establishes the fact that this person is a kohen. And v'chiluk matanos b'krachin, and what do you call it? And distributing matanos of kuna in the cities proves in the marketplaces proves that this person is a kohen. Since there are a lot of people walking out there, he wouldn't be brazen enough to accept the matanos kuna if he himself wasn't a kohen. Okay, the bottom line is what we try to prove to make me. It says here in the sea is kapayim. It says here that in Babel, just duchening alone is sufficient to establish someone's a kohen, and that's the question we were asking before. We're into machlekes, my lab, and and kohen in what respect? In every respect, including yuchsin. They can go ahead and based on that get married. So the truma. All it does is if you see a kohen duchening in Babel, it means, or eating challah in Surya, it means that. In Eretz Yisrael, if you testify this for Eretz Yisrael, then you can eat truma, but not that he can go ahead and eat yuchsin. Now, the challah and truma is the same thing. What do you mean? He said if you eat challah, you can go ahead and eat truma. Challah is truma. Doesn't it mean that since Surya must be talking about when we say that it's a kohen, it must be talking about for yuchsin. So to the first part of the brayta, must be talking about yuchsin. That if you see a kohen duchening in Babel means that you can go ahead and marry anybody he wants. Definitely has to be for yuchsin. How do we know that? Because challah is truma. What do you mean? If you eat challah, you can eat truma. Challah is truma. So therefore, that's so it must be yuchsin. Then surely after the kapayim yuchsin, the first part of about Babel, it means that we establish the fact there's a kohen for yuchsin. So really no. Achilas challah gufa l'truma. This Tana, you made an assumption that challah is from the Torah and truma is from the Torah, and so challah and truma is the same thing. No. This Tana is going to hold that challah is from the Rabbanon and truma is from the Torah. And what the Tana is talking about here is that this establishes enough credibility that he can eat truma, but nothing to do with marriage. And if we see him eat challah, which is only Rabbanon, he can eat truma, which is the Torah. Achil gufa challah says challah, but challah is only mid the Rabbanon, truma the raisa, truma is from the Torah. Umaskinan mechallah the Rabbanon, truma the raisa. If you see eating challah in Surya, the Rabbanon is truma the raisa. Same thing in Babel. If you see a kohen duchening, then it's so you can go ahead and eat truma. But that's it. And the fact that we see him eating challah, otherwise we'd never let him eat challah because challah and truma are so closely related. Just like swapped around, in other words, you think that the two are linked together, challah and truma. You should know that challah and truma are not linked. And this Tana here holds challah the Rabbanon, truma the raisa. Like we'll soon see how Rav Huna Rebbe Shua turns around the Rabbanon. Same idea. Toshma, we'll come back to that soon. Toshma coming here. Chazok lekahuna. What's established kahuna in the Siyas Kapayim and Chiluk Guranis. If you're giving out, at the warehouses, you're giving out truma, so that is proven somebody's a coin. And so too duchening. But Yisrael, with Surya and Israel. According to Yisrael, you have the butter din everywhere. If somebody goes ahead and duchen, they can investigate, make sure the person is a coin. The same thing if somebody goes to the granary, to the warehouses to collect grain, we're going to check out to see whether they're coin. And right now we're assuming that truma is from the Torah, and since he's prepared to jeopardize his life, because if you eat truma and you're not entitled to, you can be chai misa, so you can trust him for every respect. And anywhere else, and Syria and any other place. The shluchim of Rosh Chodesh, no, it's within 15 days traveling to Israel. With shluchim of Israel go to establish that it's Yom Tov. And the way Rashi explains the Gemara is that when shluchim came to a city, they didn't just walk in some stadium or some stand and a podium and got a mayor announcement. They go to a local bezin. So every one of those cities had a local bezin, and they would tell them, inform them, and the bezin then would go ahead and ask them whatever question they had, and then they will go and make their announcement. So there, those that have a bezin there, so therefore, duchening is also a valid proof. But distributing of the granas of truma, let's say, which once you're outside of Israel, it's only midrabanan. And even though we included Surya, this town holds that Surya is not considered part of Israel. That kibush yochid lo yishmei kibush. Avaloi chiluk granas, but not chiluk granas doesn't distribute anything because it's only midrabanan. Bavel to Surya. And Bavel is treated just like Surya because Bavel also had these batetin established, which means duchening we would promote him to a full-fledged kohen, but chiluk granas would not. Rashbag says Af Alexander Mitzrayim, also Alexander Mitzrayim, but he's showing you in the early days when many Yidden lived there, Mipnei Shepezin, Queen Sham, there's a bezin fixed over there. He's telling me, what do we learn? However, that this is Kapayim, it says over here that from duchening we establish the kohen. In what regard? My lovely yuchsin, that what he can get married to anybody he wants. Well, I know the challah. It means what? That the person can eat challah. So we're comparing the Siyas Kapayim and chilagranis. And what's chilagranis? Chilagranis means receiving truma. So obviously, if we say we establish to be a kohen, he's already receiving truma in other respects, which probably means getting married. So too comes to getting the Siyas Kapayim. Must be established the marriage. No. Chilagranis gufa lechallah. If we see them eating truma, going to warehouse, cooking truma, we're going to allow them to eat challah, because this town holds just the opposite. Truma is bisman as rabban, truma is on rabban, challah is the Torah today, and because truma is rabban, and we see the mean truma, we say what? We're going to promote him and allow them also to eat challah. Umaskinim, a true rabban l'chal, and we're going to promote him or elevate him from eating truma on rabban to eating challah with the Torah. Like we find that Rabbi Yeshua said to the Rabban, what happened? I met the Rabbanan of Beirav of the base of Medrash, which is called Beirav, the Shiva of the rabbis, the Yasvi. They sat to Kamri. They said, they say clearly that even though if you hold that Truma is only Rabbanan, but Chal is the Torah. So there's an opinion that Truma is Rabbanan, Chal is the Torah. That's exactly what it means. If you see someone eating Truma, which is on Rabbanan, you can now also feed them Chal. And how do I know? Why should there be a distinction between Truma and Chal? There are two different psukim in the Torah for it, but it's the language, the text of the pasuk. When they went to Israel, all the mitzvahs started in Israel, but most of them started not straight away, not immediately, but after the 7 years of the conquest, and then 7 years of destroying and distributing the land. Only after they settled down did the mitzvahs begin. But not all. Zayin shekipshu, the 7 years of conquest, Zayin shechilka, the 7 years of dividing the land. It's chayba b'chala. It says in the pasuk, "By achem ela oretz." When you arrive in Israel, you have the mitzvah of chala, and everywhere it says kisavayu, kivayacha. Here it says bibayachem, as you're coming in, as you are coming in. Sounds like even though you didn't all enter yet, but as you're coming in, start immediately. Have an immediate start. That what it says. So therefore the chayv chala straight away, even only a few people entered the soul, you already chayv chala. But the chayv truma ma'isa, but truma ma'isa is chayv after 14 years of settlement. And because Truma and Mice and all that, it depends on Shemitah, because the first 6 years you have Truma Mice, and Shemitah year you don't have Truma Mice. And we know that Shemitah didn't start counting until after the 14 years. So therefore, Truma Mice also didn't begin counting until after the 14 years. Aminu and I argued with them. So they want to say Challah starts, there's an immediate start, and Truma Shemitah after, Truma Mice afterwards. And I said to them, Aminu, no, Adirab, on the contrary. I feel the mandam, and even the one who says that Truma is man that I says Challah, they want to say that even if your Truma is Rabbanon, Challah is Natayra, because Challah is not dependent on Shemitah. Challah is, so you get it's only a few people there. Even the majority of the Jews didn't live there, so Challah is always Mahatayra. And Truma today is only Rabbanon. If you remember the end of Kesuvos, the end of Yavamas, in the early Pays, we had a big argument whether Truma today is Mahatayra and Rabbanon, whether after Ezra left Israel, did we lose the Kedusha again as far as Truma and Maisa concerned, and Truma and Maisa is only with the Rabbanon, or it's still from the Taita. So there's the first opinion say that Truma today is only the Rabbanon because most of the Jews don't live in Israel. But Challah is Mahatayda because there's Bevayachim, a few Jews live there. That's what they want to say. And I want to say just the opposite. That Challah, I want to say that Challah is Rabbanon and Truma is Mahatayda. By the way, there's a whole conundrum because officially, according to statistics, very soon you're going to have more Yidden in Israel than the rest of the world. What happens to all of these dinim, Yovel, Shemitah, and all these things? They become now Mahatayda because the majority of the Jews live there, especially Yovel, which we don't have now. Says the Gemara, I said, I'm the contrary. The time we learned, it says in the pasuk, it says, as you're arriving in the land, this is another brisa. The brisa says, when you arrive, 2, 3 Yidden walk in the land, you already have to do challah. When it comes to challah, we need the majority of the Yidden living there. Since after Ezra, the majority of Yidden did not live in Israel, so therefore, or after Churban Sheni, the majority did not live in Israel. So therefore, there's no mitzvah of challah anymore in Israel because linked when you all arrived at Israel. And when Ezra came along, most people did not go up with it. Most people remained outside of Israel. So even when Ezra arrived, Challah did not become Mahatayr because most people did not live in Israel. Most majority of people live in Babel or other countries. We lived before Spain and other countries. Because all that came up to them was only a little bit over 40,000 people. So therefore, we see clearly that there's no link, there's no nexus between Truma and Challah, and the question is only which is the Raisa, which is the Rabbah. So that's how we explain the previous Raisa as well, and proves nothing. So Tashma, coming here, continuing. We're still trying to establish if you see a coin duchening, does that mean is a carte blanche coin in every respect or not? Tashma, coming here. It says another Raisa, Chazaka Lakuna, what established Kuna, and it says Kapayim duchening, the Chiluk Guronas, and distributing of the matonas of a koyim. And Eidos and testimony and Eidos. Eidim say this person is a kohen. That's how we understand right now. Says the Gemara, if they come along and say this person is a kohen and the mother was perfectly suitable for a kohen, he's not a chol. Eidos chazaki. That's called chazaki, means a logical establishment or an establishment. Here you have Eidos. This is what you mean to say. The sea is kapayim that you see a kohen. Duchening is ki Eidos. Is tantamount to having Eidim here, that this person is a full-fledged Kohen. And Ma Eidus, just like if two Eidim come along and say this person is a Kohen. What does that mean? It allows the person to marry anybody he wants. After the CSF Kapayim, so too when it comes to Duchening is Liuchsin. So no. When it says Eidus, doesn't mean literally two Eidim coming along and say, we know this person's a Kohen, we know his parents. But rather, Eidus Haba Mikay Chazaka. It's Eidus that comes from something that we saw, an event that we saw, not because we know the family familiar at all, an event we saw, and that is like a chazak. What's the story? Yahu, for example, here are a few instances that we're going to have. What we mean? Yahu, we know we're learning more getting of Samach there that a kohen should be the one who gets the first aliyah and a Levi gets the second aliyah. And then we learned that if, let's say, there's no kohen in the shul, it's parda chavila, that the whole bundle falls apart. Big machlek is whether the Levi gets the first aliyah or secondly, or the Levi gets no aliyah at all. And then and sometimes the kohen is meichel and allows the godly soul to be first. So the Gemara tells a few stories there. Number one, who does come in Abami? A person came before the Abami. I know this following person is a kohen. So what makes you say that? So he got the aliyah of kohen. Becheskes shu kohen, and so he asked him back about me. Did he get the first aliyah as a kohen? Did it say by kohen? Or becheskes shu gadol? Maybe he was a gadol of that shul. He was a big rabbi, and therefore he preempts the kohen. As we learned in Madrid, Abami Rabasi. And so on. Rav Huna used to, get the first aliyah. Shekora, so he said no. Shekora achar of Levi. Afterwards, they called up a Levi, because if it would not have been a kohen, a Yisrael got first, because he's a Rav, then the second person would not have been called up as a Levi, because it's Sparda Chavila. In other words, when there's no kohen according to some, a Levi doesn't get any aliyah whatsoever. Or if there's no kohen, a Yisrael get before the Levi. And since over here there were other kohenim, what do you call it? Since there was no what do you call it? And if called the Levi after, it must be that he was a kohen. So the Gemara, or if there's no kohen, in the shul, other opinion, no kohen in the shul, you can call someone else the Rav, let's say, as a kohen, and then call Levi as a Levi. But over here, because there was there were kohen in the shul, so it must be that that what do you call it? If they called the Levi afterwards, it must be that he was he was a kohen. Says the Gemara, because there was another kohen in the shul as well that everyone knows is a kohen, and they called up this person. Must be that they called him up as a kohen, because as Yisrael, they would not have called up Yisrael in front of before a Levi if there was another kohen in the shul. So the Yasser was called up as a kohen, or called up from a Levi. And that's an edus based on a chazaka. We don't know for sure the kohen. We're just telling us a story. Another example. Who does the kamer Rabbi Shimon Levi? I know that's a Levi. I know this person's a Levi. So how do you know that? So he is entitled to receive meiser. Amalei said, because he was called up second in shul. Obviously, he's a Levi. So he said to him, Levi, was he called up as a Levi? He called up as a Gadol. So he said, because the Kadol of a kohen, since the kohen was called up before him, we know that if a kohen is called up before him, there must be the next person a Levi. What do you call it? Because if he was not a Levi, they would call him a Shlishi. The moment you have a kohen, you give and if there's no Levi in shul, then the kohen gets the second aliyah. Interesting. Rashi says that if there was no Levi in shul, they would call two different kohenim. Which in the Gemara getting there, we have a problem because it looks like a pagam. If we call someone else to be number two, people think, oh, he's not really a kohen. The way Rashi says it, Shnayim kohenim hayu kohenim lefanav. They called up two kohenim before him, which is okay, interesting. Anyway, must be he's a Levi. Even he said that proves he's a Levi. Again, Eidos based on the chazaka. Who does the kamer shlakish? The person came by shlakish Amalei, and his case number 3. Amalei said to him, "Was a kohen?" He was, I know. Shu kohen is a kohen. Amalei Mari is. How do you know? Amalei shekoni shebezek knesses. How do I know? Because they called him up first in shul. Amalei lo yisif shechila agronis. Sorry, did you see? That he was called in shul? Amalei said, sorry, I saw him called up first in shul. So he said to him, "The isif shechila agronis." Did you see that he also received the distributions from the gronis as a kohen receiving truma? Abelazar said to Reish Lakish, well, what kind of proof is that? What happens? There's nobody there, no farmers there, there's no granaries there, nobody can ever prove that they're kohen. And Reish Lakish and Abelazar had an argument if that's sufficient proof having a aliyah. Zimni occasion, also the same story happened before Rabbi Yechon. Popped up and he said, the Isiv Shechilaga Alagoyden, did you see that you got distributed on the granaries, and so what? Be main some going in bottle of kuna. So then Rabbi Yishlakish realized what Rabbi Loza was saying was actually what Rabbi Yechon was saying. He's parroting Rabbi Yechon. And if he would have known Rabbi Yechon said that, Yishlakish wouldn't have argued. Rabbi Loza bitches, he gave him a face of their anger. He heard some Rabbi Yechon. Interesting how he referred to Rabbi Yechon as the son of Nafcha. Somebody used to blow up, glass, whatever, metal, or that. And you did not say in his name. We already had the mother before. Rabbi Loza was very upset. Rabbi Loza said something which really Rabbi Yechon said, and he didn't say his name. And then he was appeased because everyone knows that everything Moshe Rabbeinu said is the name of the Eibusher. So too, everything that Rabbi Loza said was in the name of Rabbi Yechon. So he didn't have to mention it. And we had a civil story as well about this Loza being upset, and they didn't say it was his name of his Rebbe. Interesting. On one hand, he had such a chedut to his brother Rabbi Yechon that he would not have argued with him, but then he didn't even call him by his name. He called him the son of the father's trade. Anyway, Rebbe and Abchia, there's a machlekes between Rebbe and Abchia. Chad held ben Abi Abdul Kun. One of them decided that if the father testifies, we can trust that the son is the same thing. Because Chad held Abi Abdul. Another one was from sees machlekes here by Kain and promoted this person to be a Levi based on the evidence of his brother. No, both of them are disqualified witnesses, a father or brother, but in these cases we accept them. This time, let's conclude that Rebbe held ben Abi Abdul Kun was a Rebbe who elevated the son, promoted the son to become a Kain based on his father's evidence. This time we learned. He came along and said, this is my son. The koinu, and he's a koyin, nem, and he's believed. If a man said, this is my son, two things. This is my son, number one. Number two is he's a koyin. He's believed to feed him truma. But not as far as that you can say that he cannot marry a woman. That's what Rebbe said. I don't understand. If you believe the father when he said that my son is a kohen, believe him all the way. If you don't believe him, then don't believe him at all. If you trust him for truma, trust him also he can marry anybody he wants. If you don't trust him to marry a woman, then shouldn't trust him to truma as well. I trust him to eat truma because even if he wouldn't come forward, it's up to him because he accepts truma. He's a kohen, and he wants he can feed, and everyone gives him truma, so he has access to truma. He can give it to his son. So since it's biyadai to give it, so now he comes and testifies, my son is entitled to it. Fine. We don't believe him as far as getting married to a woman. It's not up to him, but you can go ahead and to marry him and marry a woman. So therefore, he's not believed as far as that. So Rabbi says, I don't believe him for anything. And Rebbe says, you believe him for truma, but not for the other things. And that's interesting. So even though the father is trusted to be a kohen, doesn't necessarily mean we trust the son to be a kohen. Since the Rebbe is the one who we established, is the one that elevated his son to be a kohen based on his father's testimony, is Rabchia, must be Rabchia is the one who elevated this person to be a Levi based on his brother's testimony. Why did he trust the father? Because they're related. So why trust the brother when it comes to Levi? So when answered, it was a different kind of, it wasn't testimony, it was Mashiach V'tumah. He happened to be talking like off the cuff in all innocence, like we had the Gemara there, that even a goy can be believed. Mashiach then Mashiach V'tumah.